Yep. Okay. Sorry about that, everyone. Technology is wonderful. I'm actually not going to give that whole summary again because I want to make sure the kids have time. But maybe at the end, if I need to do it for people online, I could do that. But I'm going to now have our 4 panelists introduce themselves.
Hi, my name is Steve Heyman. I'm a law professor at Chicago Kent College of Law downtown. I teach constitutional law and First Amendment, both freedom of speech and freedom of religion. And I'm just really delighted to be here this afternoon.
Hi, my name is Rob Hockman. I'm a lawyer at Sidley Austin downtown. I practice in appellate law, and I'm most importantly the husband of principal Shepard and Cass.
Hello, I'm Rabbi Goldie Guy. I am the director of Hadar Chicago, which is an institution that spreads Torah resources, learning, and lots of good stuff like that, Tefillah, throughout the Chicagoland area. And I am very proudly the former rabbinate of Anshe Shalom in the Israel congregation in Lakeview, where I reside with my husband. Many of you I know from there. And no, I will not be biased towards the ASBIO.
Hi, I'm Devorah Schoenfeld, otherwise known as Cleo's mom. I teach Judaism at Loyola University. I've been for 12 years, and I'm a member of Anshe Shalom. Really glad to be here. Looking forward to the arguments.
Okay, I'm just going to get the panelists working their video working because technology continues to be fun. But I'm going to let them get started while I do that. So I'm going to call up.
No, that's still nothing.
If it pleases the court, my name is Venison. With me today are my co-counsels, Josh Zapp, Isaac Baird, and Tamar Brent. Our fifth co-counsel, Yisberger, is unavailable. We are here today to present how the constitutional and rabbinic law should be applied to the case of Jackman versus MP, and that MP's speech should be restricted. We will start with the facts of the case. MP was a high school student in Mr. Jackson's class. MP got a grade that they were unhappy with and demanded Mr. Jackson to change it. Mr. Jackson refused to do so, and MP proceeded to post a video on social media claiming that Mr. Jackson was verbally abusing students. When Mr. Jackson confronted MP in private with MP's parents and the school principal about this, MP admitted that the video was false and said they would take the video down. They didn't take the video down and in fact continued to post more videos containing false information about Mr. Jackson in a series called Mr. Jackson Said What. This series included quotes that MP claimed Mr. Jackson had said that day, although nobody else in the class could confirm that Mr. Jackson had said these things. When confronted again in a meeting with MP's parents and the principal, MP said that the videos were just a joke. Kids were being pulled from Mr. Jackson's class because parents started seeing the videos, so Mr. Jackson started applying for new jobs at different schools. However, the schools turned him down because of concerns over these videos. Mr. Jackson, fed up with all of these issues, sued MP for defamation and won. MP appealed, saying what they had posted was protected by the First Amendment rights. The question at issue is, when does harmful speech, true or false, become unacceptable? I would like to begin with the constitutional position, which asks the question of, are MP's online posts considered protected speech? Our constitutional position is that MP's use of the First Amendment wasn't protected because of MP's disregard for the truth. The First Amendment states that Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech or of press. The First Amendment applies to this case because MP claimed that they were protected in their posts by the First Amendment, specifically the protection of freedom of expression. To solve the constitutional question, we must first decide, is Mr. Jackson a public official? If so, is there malice? And were the allegations MP posted a joke? In our first precedent, New York Times versus Sullivan, Times put out an ad which contained inaccurate information about a public official. This This person claimed this ad affected their image, so they sued the Times. The Times appealed, saying that what they said was protected by the First Amendment, and the court decided that there is an importance of discussing public issues, and when doing so, inaccurate things may be said, and decide that public officials cannot get compensation for defamation unless they can prove actual malice. This connects to the case because it sets the basis for defamation cases against public officials. It also gives us the malice standard, and as defined in court, actual malice, that is, knowledge that it was false or with reckless disregard of whether it was false or not. While New York Times or Sullivan talked about the defamation case against public officials, our next president, Gertz vs. Robert Welch Incorporated, talks about the defamation against private individuals. In Gertz vs. Robert Welch Incorporated, a magazine owned by Robert Welch Incorporated, wrote something inaccurate about Gertz, a private person. Gertz sued them on multiple counts, one being libel. He won $50,000 but lost the libel, so he appealed. The court decided that since private people are more vulnerable to the harm of defamation than public officials, the states may define what the appropriate standard is. However, states should try to ensure their compensation. In our case, we consider Mr. Jackson a private individual because he does not have the same status as a public official, and believe that there should be different standards for protection for public and private individuals against defamation. This is because the court said in the majority opinion, the first remedy of any victim of defamation is self-help. Public officials and public figures usually enjoy significantly greater access to the channels of effective communication and hence have a more realistic opportunity to contradict false statements than private individuals enjoy. So the state should ensure that Mr. Jackson gets his compensation so he may recover damages. But even if Mr. Jackson is considered a public official, he would still be found guilty of malice. This is because after they posted the videos, they admitted to the principle that the video's allegations were false, which proves that MP's allegations were made with malice, meaning active knowledge that the allegations. In another case, Hustler vs. Falwell, they discussed the role jokes have in defamation. In this case, Hustler magazine posted a parody about Jerry Falwell, which contained false statements. The parody had small print on the bottom saying it was a joke. Falwell sued to get libel compensation and won money due to emotional distress. Hustler appealed, saying his parody was within their First Amendment rights. The court agreed with Hustler and reversed the original verdict. This is because what was said was a political cartoon. According to the court, even if the cartoon is outrageous or people find speech offensive, it is not a good enough reason to restrict it. Some may claim that since Hustler was not held liable for libel because what was written was a joke, MP shouldn't be held liable as what they posted, as their posts were a joke. However, this is not the case, because in Hustler's case, Hustler's parody made it clear it was a joke, as there was text in multiple places that said it was a joke. And it was posted in Hustler's magazine, a magazine well known for its satire. On the other hand, the MP only stated that the videos were a joke in private, and while posting it included fake quotes posted as real ones and very strong language accusing Mr. Jackson of verbal abuse. The people who saw the accusations did not know it was a joke and acted on this assumption, harming Mr. Jackson. I want to present two sentences to you. The first one is scientists take pictures of whales from space. When you hear this, you might be thinking it's an earnest statement, which talks about scientists who are taking pictures of whales using satellites, not that the whales come from space. The next sentence is $60,000 were stolen from a Whole Foods in New York. Luckily, Whole Foods will make all that money back the next time someone buys an apple. Jimmy Fallon said this on The Late Show. When he said it was a joke, the audience laughed because they knew it was a joke and won't believe that Whole Foods is selling apples for that amount of money. He also is a comedian and presents himself as one. But when we look at MP's allegations, it seems plausible, just like the first example sentence, because it was not outlandish like the Jimmy Fallon joke. So we must not hold people responsible for assuming that false info was a joke when it was presented as a truth instead of as a joke. The dissenting opinion in Gertz vs. Robert Welch Incorporated disagrees with this argument for compensation, specifically the limitation of speech in general. In Gertz vs. Robert Welch Inc., the dissenting opinion states that the original interpretation of the First Amendment protects all speech, and said that since the First Amendment is applicable to the states to the 14th Amendment, states do not have the responsibility to ensure compensation. However, we do not agree with this because in the case where someone is using freedom not only to not exchange ideas, but to also damage another member of the public, becomes unacceptable and even dangerous to society. When people know that they won't be able to collect damages for job problems caused by speech, they won't give negative feedback or critique one another. In New York Times for Sullivan, in the case, the court said a rule compelling critic of official conduct to guarantee the truth of all his factual assertions leads to comparable self-censorship. Furthermore, by not limiting the damaging speech, we're allowing the public conversations to be diluted with harmful lies and encourage First Amendment judgment. The court said neither the intentional lying nor the careless error materially advances society's interest in uninhibited, robust, and wide open debate on public issues. This means that since having speech diluted with harmful lies is no benefit to society, so we must limit speech like this for the better of society. Accordingly, we ask that you find that MP owes Mr. Jackson compensation for their videos posted on the internet. We will now move on to the rabbinic position, which asks the question of when do jokes go too far and become embarrassing? Did the social media post make the damages worse? And our answer to those questions is that our evidence finds that MP's use of speech is wrong, because it was used to harm Mr. Jackson from his general life. Our rabbinic foundational source is Vayikra 1917, which says, "Reprove your king, but incur no guilt on their king." This means that a person is allowed to correct somebody if they think what the person is doing is wrong, but they cannot embarrass them, especially not in public. From this, we get the rabbinic argument that MPs shouldn't have shamed Mr. Jackson, especially not on social media, where it could be seen by a lot of people and it could be hard to take down and take back. This sets the standard of not embarrassing people, which we will see discussed in tomorrow's response and more. In the Sefer HaKinun, it discusses Vayikra 1917. It talks about how he should not embarrass people, but if he must confront them, he should do it first in private, and the only reason you should go public is if they didn't listen to your feedback the first time. This does not apply to our case because even though some people may argue that MP did confront Mr. Jackson privately, but Mr. Jackson refused to change it, and as a last resort, they went public, which is not true because MP confronted Mr. Jackson about a totally different thing in private than in public. If MP confronted Mr. Jackson about their grade, not only in private but in public too, their allegations would have been justified. But since they did not, their allegations count as embarrassment. This might be the case with embarrassing speech, however, what if the person said was a joke? The Mishnah Torah teaches us that even Lashon Hara, disguised as joke, is condemned, as it says, similarly to be condemned is a person who relates Lashon Hara and frivolity and jest as if he were not speaking with hatred. This means that even if what MP said was a joke, it is still Lashon Hara and it is therefore condemned and liable for compensation. Moreover, MP furthered Mr. Jackson's embarrassment and the damage to his career by posting the video on social media. Our next precedent is by Rabbi Yehuda Zoltan, who discusses the very issue in his response about public shaming on social networks. He said, in reference to shaming online, that thousands of internet users can see comments, videos, and images, and in a short period of time, the shame can reach hundreds of thousands of internet users, including the media. Continue to say that publicity and distribution of social networks makes the offense accessible, immediate, and permanently on the record. This talks about how there were always people who spoke about others with ill intent, but in the past, only small social circles would hear it. But now with technology, there's a much bigger impact. Because when this is posted online, thousands of people can see this in a short period of time, and then occasionally the post may go viral. He also brings up how words can kill, which means that the damages of defamation can be so awful, so you must not worsen them by posting it online. Since we've answered the question of when do jokes go too far and become embarrassing, we are left to figure out if the allegations were posted, and since the allegations were posted online, did it make the damages worse? And Rabbi Yehuda Zoltan answers it perfectly. He brings up that since allegations reach thousands of people when online and are permanent, the damages are automatically worse. In fact, we saw this in the widespread reaction by both schools and parents. So not only did MP harm Mr. Jackson by saying these allegations, MP made the damages worse by posting these allegations. The Mishnah Torah disagrees with this argument of compensation. In the Mishnah Torah, while establishing liability for different types of people, it says, when a person embarrasses a colleague with words, he is not held liable for financial penalty. However, we do not think this applies to our case because, first of all, unlike the language in the Mishnah Torah, MP and Mr. Jackson have a teacher-student relationship rather than a colleague-colleague relationship. This is because there is not an even balance of power between MP and Mr. Jackson, which is a characteristic of a colleague relationship. However, even if they are to be considered colleagues, the Mishnah Torah does not account for the fact that people could be horribly embarrassed and that this embarrassment could quite possibly mess up the rest of their lives. So we find that embarrassment and financial damages outweigh the consideration of their relationship. Accordingly, we ask that you find that MP did not only embarrass Mr. Jackson, but made the damages worse by posting it online and should be held accountable. Thank you for your time.
You can begin when you're ready.
Hello, I'm the Q&A guy. I'm here to answer any and all questions. For lack of a better introduction.
So, thank you. So, that was an extremely impressive presentation. The question I have, has to do with who's being sued, in this case. So, Morgan's being sued, but the case also says that their family is being sued, and I wonder if you can explain what the basis is for the lawsuit against the family, and on what grounds there might be holding them responsible, when they're not the ones who, made the defamatory statements.
I think this is because Morgan's parents allowed Morgan to be able to do this and did not either talk to Morgan personally about removing these statements, or because I think Morgan's parents could have talked about it and discussed it and understood that these allegations were not true, because they were in the meeting with the principal, so they should have known that these were false. And therefore, it would have been much better that they had acted on that and stopped Morgan from posting more videos and helped Morgan take them down the internet.
So I'm interested in exploring how far you want to push your position. You say that, these didn't seem to be jokes, or at least it wasn't obvious that it was jokes. And I'm interested in how I'm supposed to tell the difference between something that is and isn't a joke. And I'm also interested in why you think jokes should be protected speech at all. If they're harmful, they're harmful. If they're not, they're not.
So jokes can kind of be broken into two categories. So constitutional and rabbinically. So constitutionally, I think jokes in general, if they don't have an effect on the person, they can be protected in their freedom of speech because they're not dangerous to the person. However, like rabbinically, if a joke says something bad about somebody, it's still considered to be harmful to that person. And in the rabbinical position, jokes aren't just harmful like to the person you say them about, they're also harmful to the person that sent them.
Thank you so much for your. Thank you so much for your very well-researched and impressive presentation. I was curious about the argument that was made for shaming when the person is first made aware of the issue in private and then it's taken public. I'm curious about why you think that when they approached them in private, the teacher in private first, that it didn't amount to a good enough for the teacher, according to our sources.
This is because what Morgan approached Mr. Jackson about in public was a lot different than what they approached in let me rephrase that. So what Morgan approached in private was that Mr. Jackson gave them too low of a grade in their opinion. What they approached the kind of social media community about was that Mr. Jackson had been verbally abusive, which are very different things, and therefore the warning doesn't count as a warning because they're not the same issue. They're very different.
Thank you. Like the other panelists, I agree this is a very impressive presentation, really very thoroughly researched with very impressive use of sources. One question that I wanted to ask is about reading speech in the rabbinic texts and reading TikTok as speech. That we would not necessarily read TikTok as speech in other contexts. For example, if I played a TikTok video of someone saying a prayer, of someone saying the Shema, I would not count that as saying the Shema. So when we're looking at Rob Zeldin's response about embarrassment, I can say that this is embarrassment, but can we say that it is speech? What makes it count as speech in this context?
But I think it really is just a certain amount of communication that goes along. They are really saying things about Mr. Jackson and the way he supposedly is in classes, and I think that does account as speech because it is communicating about how he goes about things in class.
I have one other question, and because you've all been so impressive and done such impressive work, it's going to take you a little bit out of the range of the material that you have. I'm interested in your thoughts about whether we should approach this case as a matter of constitutional law differently because it's in a school setting. Should I treat students as having the same kind of free speech rights that adults outside the world have, or should schools be able to be more restrictive?
So I think that schools might need to be a bit more restrictive, but also especially in this context where there was not just like a school level of damage, it was a serious level of damage. Mr. Jackson was unable to get more jobs, and he was unable to like switch schools, and he didn't have many students left because parents were pulling them from the classes. So I think there is a very high level of responsibility that falls on Morgan, but maybe it might need to be approached slightly differently from a school setting, but I think in this case, especially, there's not as much leeway.
Yeah, I have a question for you about the sort of what the fundamental First Amendment goal ought to be here. I think that your colleague was very convincing in terms of what the existing First Amendment doctrine is, talking about the New York Times case and the Kurtz case. But I want to ask you about the dissenting or concurring opinions in New York Times and Kurtz. And in both of those cases, the justices said, really, first of all, the First Amendment should be understood as absolute. It says Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech. It doesn't say it's okay to restrict speech when there's a good enough reason for it. And beyond that, I guess a First Amendment absolutist would argue that that really the appropriate response for bad speech is more speech, is counter speech. In the context of this particular case, why shouldn't it be the case that we would simply sort of allow Mr. Jackson, allow the school authorities to respond to the various allegations that Morgan's made, and then allow members of the public, allow parents, other students at the school to make their own judgment about whether he was telling the truth or not, rather than for the coercive power of the law to kind of step in and to impose sanctions on Morgan here.
I think we really think that there really needs to be a level of power to super defamation because of the amount of damage defamation can have, and that which cannot necessarily be countered by other schools, because schools, they were just concerned not just about how true the allegations were, they were concerned about just even like the thought that a teacher might be doing this, and it still has a lot of damage whether or not it's true. And like, so again, with the schools, so they said that they were concerned not just because they might think that these were true, but just because they didn't want somebody on their staff with that reputation. And it can still really be harmful, and people need to be able to, it's not something that other speech might be able to counteract.
Hi, I want to return here to the question of penalty and whether on a halachic level there should be a requirement of payment. That both the Sefer Chinuch and Maimonides, as your colleague pointed out, state that for cases like this, that the court cannot inflict a punishment, that the punishment comes from heaven. Now, your colleague also pointed out why this case might be different. But I wanted to ask if there are aspects to this case that you think cannot be punished by the court, but that you expect will face consequences from God in some way.
Can you please rephrase that question?
Both the Sefer Chinuch and Maimonides, when describing the consequences for Lashon Hara, describe it as something that is not punished by the court, but something that is punished by God. So your colleague both explained why she believes that in this particular case, the court should decide on damages. I was wondering if you think that there are aspects to this case that cannot be decided by the court, but will be decided, but consequences that will be inflicted by heaven.
I mean, I think both just a compensation between Mr. Jackson and Morgan and kind of a compensation just with Morgan and themselves for what they did and kind of needs to happen because I think that generally for, them to move forward, they need to kind of, I think, recover themselves and maybe that would need to be something God interferes with, but maybe that just be something they can handle with themselves.
I have one last question for you, which is, suppose that the videos had simply made fun of Mr. Jackson, said that they thought he was a bad teacher, which was essentially what Morgan was trying to convey here. But suppose that that they didn't contain sort of specific allegations that people would take as being factual, but just involved ridicule and criticizing his teaching style, saying too strict and so forth. What would your position be in that particular case in terms of the constitutional issue? Would you regard that speech as being protected or unprotected?
I think that type of speech might need to be protected because it is just a general criticism, which is the purpose of the First Amendment to help with these general criticisms which should help society. I guess it depends on, so I think this type of certain ridicule it might certainly be offensive, and I think it depends on the damage it did, and but I think generally if it was just like, I don't like his teaching style, then I think that needs to be protected.
Thank you very much, counsel.
If it pleases the court, my name is Josh Stack and I'm here with Tamar Bransky. Today we are asking you to find that MP owes Mr. Jackson compensation for defamation.
For the constitutional side, we've argued that MP was defaming Mr. Jackson by posting the videos online, making him seem corporally abusive, as he never explains the videos as a joke in public. We also argued Mr. Jackson needed more compensation from the government because of him being a private individual. As evidence, we presented the case Garrett v. Robert Welch, a case where a police officer was put on trial for murder. In a magazine owned by the Robert Welch publishing company then posted an article that claimed the trial was a communist conspiracy. With it, the court decided that since the lawyer, Elmer Rich, the private individual large publishing company, posting about him to the public, he was owed compensation from Robert Welch. This relates to our case, with the claims being made about Mr. Jackson on a social media platform, MP. Similar to the magazine post about Elmer, he published videos from issue on social media. Thousands, if not millions of people could see anything you post online. So by posting the videos online, it becomes the publisher, which is why Mr. Jackson needs more compensation from the government as he was a private individual. Next page we share with Puckler v. Fowler. In this case, Puckler magazine posted an ad where they made a parody. Where they made a parody of Terry Farlow. The article contained explicit jokes with a small label saying that they were only jokes. fellow student telling me that the label was not obvious enough. The Hop the magazine had been short. That just because he had those labels it's not there, and that because he takes offense to the joke does not mean it applies. Although this would not apply because in Jackson videos jokes in a private setting and continue to make public claims. It's called about their teacher, Mr. Jackson. In Hustler, we followed the magazine was known for parodies and made it publicly obvious that the art was for purposes. That would be where the two cases differ. MP had posted videos to TikTok, a popular social media platform, any number for any number. See it and interpret it in any way. MP had also not spent it serious. The final case I will talk about is the New York Times v. Soul case. The New York Times advertised an ad with multiple inaccuracies about public official. The public official then said the ad affected reputation and the students in the New York Times. The New York Times appeals, so they have freedom of speech, like in Jackson Van. NP posted videos of accuracies about how Mr. Jackson had been teaching them and treating them, and this did affect Mr. Jackson's reputation, as multiple students were being pulled from his class, and he had lost multiple job opportunities when trying to find work where he have that reputation. Because of the video series by we think that in the constitutional perspective, Mr. Jackson should be compensated.
We will now move to the rabbinic part, which is our opinion clearly expressed that MP's use of speech was wrong, because it was used to harm Mr. Jackson both in his general life and career. Despite the fact that MP said the posts were a joke in private, this was not at all clear to the people who viewed the video. Rabbi Yehuda Zoldan, in his response to public streaming on social networks, says, "Embarrassing others is a very serious prohibition. Carry out any other action that will harm prohibition. Therefore, one should not shame, insult, slander, speak ill of others, or carry out any other action that will harm another person." MP embarrassed Mr. Jackson by posting the video. Rabbi Zoldan continues to say that embarrassing another person strikes a murder because of the way that harmful speech can permanently damage someone's reputation, and MP said harmful speech to Mr. Jackson, which permanently damaged his reputation. Earlier in the case, we quoted Rabbi Yehuda Zoldan, who said, "Embarrassing others is a very serious prohibition. Therefore, one should not shame, insult, slander, speak ill of others, or carry out any other action that will harm another person. Embarrassing another person strikes as murder." It is saying that if you embarrass another person, that is like you get rid of their feelings. In this case, MP is embarrassing, shaming, insulting, slandering, and speaking ill of Mr. Jackson by posting the TikTok false statements. The false statements on TikTok. And the Sefer Afinu 240 says almost the same thing as Rabbi Yehuda Zoldan. It says, "Since embarrassment is very painful for the creatures, there is nothing greater than it. Therefore, God prevented us from causing so much pain to his creatures." The Sefer Afinu is saying that it brings pain to people when you embarrass them. And Rabbi Yehuda Zoldan is saying that embarrassing is if we're getting rid of their feelings. When MP embarrassed Mr. Jackson, they were not trying to help him, they were just trying to embarrass him. Mishnah Torah in Human Disposition 7 says, similarly to a person who relates Lashon Hara in jest as if he were not speaking with hatred, which means if you are going to embarrass someone to help them, it is okay. But MP was not trying to help Mr. Jackson. She was just trying to embarrass him.
In closing, we once again ask you to find that NP owes Mr. Jackson compensation for defamation. Thank you for your time.
Okay, so that was the end of our first case. The next case will be Epstein versus Hamilton. So you guys can find your seat. Thank you all for going first. Oh, yes. Do you guys want to do it now or do you want to wait till the end? It's up to you. Wait till the end. Okay, excellent. We'll keep them in suspense. Have some to confer, yeah.
I'm looking for
For those who are at home, I realized one more technical difficulty that the slide deck was not projecting for you all. We will make sure it is on this one, but in order to make sure you can also see who is speaking, you want to have speaker view selected for your view, and then you'll be able to see the slide deck and the person who is speaking. Who's going to do your slides? 1 second, let me make sure that it is actually sharing the screen. Out of the way for everybody. This is the start, right? Okay. This is the start. They don't want that one. It's okay, John. Okay. Not quite right. Okay. It's okay. Who's ready to begin? Okay, jump in.
My name is Montana Rising. And my name is Shoshana Camp. We are, with me today are my co-counsels, Jack Eskelson, Shoshana Boston, Golda Rubenstein, and Matthew Freeman, who's not able to join us today. We are here today to argue the case of Levi Epstein and Casey Hamilton, and why Hamilton's lie is unconstitutional. Our overall question is it okay to allocate lie for yourself as long as there's a stopping point, especially when you're defending someone in the process? It's actually a case in 2001, students at Alexandria High in Illinois were caught cheating on their SATs, and no names were released. And that same year, Levi Epstein was a student at Alexandria High School, and in 2017, Casey Hamilton was the principal. And in 2021, Epstein and Hamilton were running for mayor. And Hamilton was losing, so she passed out flyers saying that Epstein was part of the 2001 scandal, and this caused Epstein to lose, so he sued Hamilton. And Hamilton was acting with malice because she was aware of her lie, and malice is a lie you are intentionally. And Hamilton argues that a First Amendment states Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech of the press. Hamilton knowingly lied about Epstein being involved, but she's arguing that she has the right to do this according to the First Amendment. Our constitutional question is, is what Hamilton did protected by the First Amendment. Oh, our first president, New York Times, we told. The New York Times wrote an ad about asking for donation for Martin Luther King Jr. for the charges he was faced in Alabama for falsely for lying under oath. The ad contained a few little bit of false information about the Montgomery Police Department. And L.B. Sullivan worked at the police department and thought it was reflecting on him badly. So he asked the Times to take out that information and fix the ad, and they refused. So he sued the New York Times and received $500,000 in damages. And then so the New York Times appealed this. And the court found that the second time around, the New York Times had won and they did not need to pay. This is because a public official is not allowed to sue for defamation unless he proves that the statement was made with actual malice, that is, with knowledge that it was false. That was in Justice Brennan's majority opinion. Hamilton lies by saying Epstein was part of the cheating scandal, knowing that it was false. Passing up the flyer 1 week before the election, and this is considered malice. Our other president is U.S. v. Alvarez. Xavier Alvarez was in a meeting and lied to the Walnut Valley Water District Board of Directors, saying he was in the Army, he was retired from the Army, and he was in the Army for 25 years, and he received the Medal of Honor during that time. The Stolen Valor Act of 2005 prohibits him from saying this, so he was charged with 2 counts of falsely representing that he got the Medal of Honor. And he appealed this case, and he appealed this decision, and the Court of Appeals took off his charges, but the government disagreed, so they appealed the Court of Appeals decision, and they found that the Court of Appeals decision is affirmed. And this connects to our case because they both involve someone lying to help themselves. But it also shouldn't connect because in Justice Brennan in Justice Kennedy's majority decision, he says that there are certain categories of speech and expression that can be restricted, and defamation is one of the categories that they list. We believe that what Hamilton did was unconstitutional because in Justice Alito's dissent in U.S. v. Alvarez, it said that the Constitution protects certain lies as long as the lie is protecting something or someone. For example, lying to protect someone's privacy. Now my health cancel, a Shoshana cancel is that our rabbinical side.
The last question is, what does it mean to lie or mistreat somebody when it comes to politics? The Mishnah Torah says, Lashon Hara kills 3 people, the one who speaks it, the one who listens to it, and the one who it is spoken about. The one who listens to it suffers more than the one who speaks it. This is similarly the third case because Hamilton is used Lashon Hara by putting flyers with false information behind Epstein's back. In this case, Hamilton is the one who speaks it. The people of Alexandria, Illinois,
are the ones who are listening, and Epstein was the one who was spoken about. Rabbi Meir says, thus seeking out information that is freely available to the public that would not seem to constitute the halachically impermissible act of gossiping. This should not apply to our case because Rabbi Meir says that seeking out and sharing information that is freely available is not gossiping, except for the information that Hamilton put out, which is a lie, which makes it lashon hara, and the information that is not really available. We believe that because what Hamilton did was violating halakha. We believe this because the Mishnah Torah says that that lying is considered lashon hara. It is often compared to murder. The Mishnah Torah also says, "Do not go around gossiping among your people." Hamilton gossiped around Epstein's back by mailing out flyers that had false information that caused Epstein's reputation to lose. Accordingly, we ask that you find Hamilton's lie against halakha. Thank you for your time.
Today I'm here with my co-counsel, Shantara Basha, and my name is Jack Eskelson, and today we'll be accepting your question.
Good afternoon. In order for Epstein to recover in this case, he really has to show two things. One is that the speech that she engaged in was not protected by the First Amendment. But the other is that the law that he is suing under is actually consistent with the First Amendment. And that's the question that I have. Because I'm very convinced by your argument that that her speech is not protected because she knowingly lied and the Supreme Court cases that you've talked about, that speech is not protected. But the law that is that he's suing under prohibits known lies by political candidates. And so let me give you what we law professors call a hypothetical. Suppose that that when Hamilton was campaigning, that she goes to a Jewish deli, she tastes their matzo ball soup, and she says, "I love matzo ball soup, and this is the best matzo ball soup I've ever had." Suppose that that's a complete lie. Suppose that she hates matzo ball soup and she actually thinks this particular soup is the worst that she's ever had. Wouldn't that violate the law that he's suing under here? That is, wouldn't that be a known lie by a political candidate? That's part A of the question. And part B is it really consistent with the First Amendment for the state to make it illegal to tell lies about whether you like matzo ball soup or not?
Well, I kind of think that in this situation, she was really lying about matzo ball soup, just to kind of not feel out the awkwardness. I kind of feel like that would be a white lie, and I feel like politicians, if it's to get out of an awkward situation, they should be able to make a white.
Just a follow up for a moment. So, can you say a little bit more about why you think the matzo ball soup case is different than the actual case that we have here, where she's lying about her political fund? Where exactly do we draw the line between these two?
I think that it connects more to politics in a way that you have a seat in office, then it would be more of a problem even if it was a white lie. But because it was about multiple soup or a small thing, I don't think that much it would matter if it was a white lie.
I'm interested in your answer, Ms. Gabe. I want to suggest an alternative way to think about the case and the problem. If it's about Nazi, who cares? Right, the court can decide what's true and what's false and not much rights. But in this case, it looks like what rides on it is sort of the legitimacy of the outcome of the election. And should a court be concerned about being asked to decide whether essentially the outcome of the election was fair because it was based on a lie? And shouldn't courts stay away from that? And shouldn't that be a reason to let truth come out through debate only?
Well, I think that the court should be able to, and well, in this specific case where Hamilton managed to ruin Epstein's reputation and managed to like win an election, but also like in the Constitution is trying to stop the government from becoming corrupt. And if politicians were to lie and get into office, I feel like there should be a court case about that, not just revealing the truth. I think if there's a court case, it can really, kind of get the right outcome for the election.
Again, a wonderful presentation, very thorough, very well presented. I'm curious, according to the halacha, right? You think you're arguing that Hamilton was violating halacha, and the question is, both the Sefer HaChinuch and the Rambam and the Mishnah Torah say that one who violates this prohibition, eino lokeh, right? They don't receive lashes because it's a violation that didn't have like an actual physical action associated with it. I'm curious what you think the ramification of the guilty verdict should be, right? If they were in violation of halacha, what should the punishment?
Replace the question.
Sure. The Rambam and the Sefer HaChinuch both say that even if, like you're arguing, they were in violation, Hamilton was in violation of halacha by making these claims against Epstein. What might the punishment be according to halacha, given that the sources also say this wasn't a real action, it was just speech, which somehow falls short of qualifying for lashes according to these sources, which would be any violation of don't do this would get lashes from the Torah or from the rabbis. Both these halachic sources say there's no punishment of lashes associated with it, even if they're in violation. So I'm curious, in your final argument, right, saying this Hamilton violated halacha, what should the result be? What should their punishment be?
I think that their punishment, maybe they shouldn't, in this case, maybe they shouldn't be allowed to become mayor because, again, they could lie in that when they're mayor, and they could lie and that could become very bad for them.
Thank you. I also have a question about the Rambam. The Rambam, it's very clear that some very bad speech acts were happening here. But the Rambam distinguishes between a series of different ways that you can harm people with speech. He distinguishes between lashon hara, rechilut, which was translated here as gossip, hotza'at shemra, which is translated here as defamation, and what's translated here as revenge, taking revenge. I'm wondering which of these particular sins you think took place here? Was it all of them or some of them?
I would say all of them because there was defamation, there was gossiping, talking about Epstein behind his back, but then there was also lashon hara by kind of ruining his reputation by saying something when he wasn't there.
I'll ask one more question while I have the microphone. it's hard to make a case for Hamilton here. And from a halakhic perspective. But I'm wondering, I assume you're Epstein's lawyers. But I'm wondering if you've been advising Hamilton from a halakhic perspective. I'm assuming you would not have been making a First Amendment case because that's not a halakhic category. But I'm wondering if there would be anything that you could think of to advise Hamilton with. How would you think to make a case for Hamilton? Is there anything?
Do you mean like what he should have done or?
In her defense? So the defense that she gives in this text is she says she was within her First Amendment rights. If you had been her lawyer, and if you had been advising her to make a halachic defense, is there anything that you could have advised her to say? Is there anything that you could possibly find in the halachic sources that could justify saying false things about a political opponent in an election race?
You can maybe bring up that, like, although it doesn't apply to the situation, but maybe that you could, in theory, say something bad about like an opposing candidate or something, if it did end up for the greater good. If that opponent was going to, like, I don't know, take all the city's money or do something horrible like that. This is the court. My name is Golda Rubenstein, and this is my co-counsel, Shoshana Bash. Today, we are asking you to uphold the lower court's decision finding that Casey Hamilton's actions and lies are unconstitutional. My co-counsel described how desperate Hamilton was, that she mailed out a flyer to every house in Alexandria, Illinois, saying that Epstein was one of the cheaters in the 2001 scandal. Because of this, Epstein lost the election. He sued Hamilton for defamation and won. Hamilton appealed this case to the Supreme Court, saying that she was within her First Amendment rights. The Supreme Court has repeatedly decided that defamation wasn't protected speech. In U.S. v. Alvarez, the court's decision says that there are certain categories of speech and expression that can be restricted. Defamation is one of those categories that they listed. Hamilton defamed Epstein by writing a false flyer. By doing this, she ruined his reputation and won the election. We know it's false because Hamilton was principal of the school for a short period of time, which means she would have access to all the files, like when Epstein was in school. And she would have been able to determine whether or not Epstein was really part of the scandal. This means Hamilton acted with malice because she knowingly lied. Malice, which means a lie that you were aware that you were telling, is prohibited by the majority decision on precedent New York Times versus Sullivan. In another one of our precedents, U.S. versus Alvarez, Justice Alito's dissent said that the Constitution protects certain lies as long as they protect something or someone. For example, lying to protect someone's privacy or lying to protect a child. Hamilton's lie doesn't protect someone or something. Instead, her lie defamed someone else and only helped her get elected into office, which is not one of the times it's okay to lie. And even if Epstein was one of the 2001 cheaters, he still had a right to privacy because the investigation was sealed and the names of the minors were never released. Hamilton crossed the line either way. Rabbinically speaking, Hamilton has spoken malicious. Malicious speech is when you intend to harm people's reputation and when you cause the person embarrassment. Rabbi Yochanan says in Erechim 15b, anyone who speaks malicious speech is considered as though he denied the fundamental belief in God. According to Rabbi Yochanan, it doesn't matter how or why you say malicious speech, you suffer terrible consequences either way. Hamilton also gossips about Epstein, which is prohibited by the Mishnah Torah in Leviticus 19:16, which says, "Do not go around gossiping among your people." Hamilton passing out those flyers is gossiping about Epstein. You are also prohibited to say lashon hara. Lashon hara is talking badly behind someone's back.
Hamilton talked badly behind Epstein's back, causing him to lose the election. The Mishnah Torah says, Lashon Hara kills 3 people: the one who speaks it, the one who listens to it, and the one who is spoken about. The one who listens to it suffers more than the one who speaks it. In this case, Hamilton was the one who spoke it, the people of Alexandria were the ones who were listening, and Epstein was the one who was spoken about. This essentially murdered all 3 of them because Epstein's reputation was ruined. Alexandria got fooled by the lie and thought that Epstein was doing good, and Hamilton's reputation got ruined because she got caught and sued by Epstein. In closing, we once again ask that you find Casey Hamilton's appeal be denied. Thank you.
Okay, thank you guys very much. You're done. Next up is the case of Unitrack versus Hernandez. So you're doing the opening. If it pleases the court. Not yet. If it pleases the court. My name is Isaac Silverman, and with me today are my co-counsel, Alex Hoff, Miguel Hamairi, Ayala Frati, Sammy Berlin, and Jonathan Steinitz Miller. We are here today to argue that Maya Hernandez is in the wrong from both rabbinic and constitutional perspectives. Okay. Unitrack is a company that helps students get into college by getting alumni to sponsor the student's college application. They require 2 social media accounts to verify age and learn about the person. They were accused of online fraud, and Maya Hernandez of the Chicago Sun-Times wanted to find out. She tried to schedule meetings with them, but as it didn't work, she ended up creating several fake accounts and maintaining them for months to investigate. She found that the alumni sponsors weren't pushing conspiracies on her, but they were telling her to follow people who were. She wrote an article about it, and Unitrack sued her under the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. She believes that her actions are within her First Amendment rights. Our overall question for the rabbinic side is what is Lashon Hara? More specifically, if whether it's true or not matters. In Bava Metzia 4:10, it says that one may not say to a seller, "For how much are you selling this item?" if he does not wish to purchase it. It shows that intentions matter and forbids asking needless questions that would get a seller's hopes up. He doesn't actually want their services or their product, she wants to expose them. Chofetz Chaim says that one's intent must be for benefit, and not to enjoy disparaging the person or because of prior hatred. It could mean that because she has good intentions, it would be allowed, but she's profiting off of it, so we can know
that her intentions are not only benefit. And additionally, in Leviticus, it says, do not profit by the blood of your fellow. And Hernandez is profiting off of the story.
Is it please the court, my name is Alex Bess, and I am here to argue that Maya Hernandez is in the wrong on behalf of the Constitution. Constitutional question is, can the government punish Maya for breaching the terms of agreement in the CFAA, which is Computer Fraud and Abuse Act? In the terms of the Constitution, this means the government can punish Maya because the First Amendment doesn't say that she has all the freedom of speech and press. The way that the First Amendment applies to the case is because the First Amendment says they have freedom of speech and press. A precedent that supports our case is Food Lion Incorporated versus Capital City / ABC. In the case, there was a food store called Food Lion. They were mixing old meat with new meat, repackaging fish, and applying barbecue sauce to their chicken. Two reporters named Dale and Barnett applied to work at the job using fake identities. They got the job. While doing their work, they videotaped everything that was going on and put it on TV. Food Lion sued the reporters. The court found that Dale and Barnett were guilty because they were trespassing, even though they were employees because they lied. This applies to our case because, like the reporters in the Food Lion case that were trespassing and lied in their application, Maya lied in her accounts, which was in the terms of agreement, and that said that the accounts have to be truthful and accurate. An opposing case is Van Byrne versus US. In the case, a police officer went on a computer that he was allowed to use to see if another officer was undercover, but how he used it was wrong, breaking the CFAA. The court found that he was not guilty because he was allowed access on the computer. However, this is different than Maya because she breached the terms of agreement and had no access to the information because she lied. When in the Van Byrne versus US, he was allowed to get on the computer, just not what he was doing. Unitrack's suing Maya is constitutional because she broke the terms of agreement by lying about everything and not being truthful, and the CFAA by stealing information. Accordingly, we ask that you find that Maya is not protected by the First Amendment. Thank you for your time.
All right, thank you. I appreciate the comprehensive presentation of a really difficult and complex case.
Good afternoon. My name is John Steines Miller, and I'm here to answer constitutional questions.
My name is Sammy Berlin, and I'm here to answer your rabbinical questions.
Thank you. I'll start with, we'll start from the other end this time. I have a question about the identification of the company of Fast Track as a comrade for the purposes of being a legitimate target of Lashon Hara. That the sources both from Leviticus and Maimonides describe a prohibition of speaking Lashon Hara against a chaver or a rea, against a comrade or a colleague. And I'm wondering about the applicability of that to a corporation which is not attached to an individual and which seems to be engaging in unethical practices.
Yeah, so says Rabbi Jill Hammer says in her halacha that talking Lashon Hara to one person, that's not considered to be Lashon Hara, but if you talk to a group of people or multiple different people, then that is. And this applies to this case because Maya Hernandez, she creates a fake account and then she goes and tries to investigate Unitrack. But then instead of she doesn't tell it to one person, she publishes in a newspaper. And so basically everybody who's reading the Chicago Sun-Times is going to find out about Unitrack. And they're going to think that Unitrack is doing these very, very unethical practices, like you said. I think that probably I think that Maya would probably be guilty because she was
publishing this to a newspaper. And another like way that she could have done it would be is like, let's say she told law enforcement to investigate, and they could have carried out like a fair investigation of Unitrack, because we don't, I mean, in our court system, we don't, like, you're not guilty until you're proven guilty. So according to that, Unitrack technically isn't guilty until they have a fair trial, which they didn't have. So yeah.
Sorry, I'm afraid I didn't explain my question clearly. So if I speak Lashon Hara about a rock, I'm not guilty of Lashon Hara. If I say that's a really ugly rock, right? So it needs to be something which is a human being, which can qualify as my comrade or my friend. So I guess my question is, would a corporation like Fast Track qualify as a comrade for the purposes of something that falls under the category of a thing that you can, that the halachot of Lashon Hara would apply to? Is it more like a human being than like a rock?
It is probably more like a human being. I mean, Unitrack, they're a company, they're actually, if they're doing it right, they're probably doing something really, really good, because they're helping all these kids get into college by like, they're just like, I don't know, they're just getting sponsors, but like, that's not like invading anything, or that's not like something like cheating on the SAT or anything like that. So there probably are like, it probably is more related to like being a human versus a rock, because like they're trying to like help students get into college, and they're a corporation. And so I think that like corporations probably, they have like specific like guidelines that a corporation can follow. So yeah, I would probably say that Unitrack would be considered to be like a comrade, because it's a company, and a company is like made up of a group of people.
Thank you so much. I have a couple questions. The first is, how would you address the fact that Maya felt she was helping to mitigate harm? She was helping to protect others who might be fooled by a company that was claiming to be able to achieve certain results for their clients, right? To help them get into college through their alumni network. And she was revealing them to not have a very strong alumni network that would actually help accomplish this. So how would the fact that Maya's trying to prevent harm to others change your view of whether or not this is considered Lashon Hara?
Yes, well, as I was saying earlier, Maya had every right to investigate Unitrack. Unitrack was a complete scam. They were totally like mishandling these students. They were creating all these big like conspiracies and all these crazy things. So yes, Unitrack was definitely was definitely committing some sort of crime with the fraud that they were doing. But I think that Maya, as a reporter, she had many different options on how to handle this case and how to handle Unitrack's terrible actions, and she didn't do it the right way. Instead, like I said earlier, one thing that she could have done, instead of speaking Lashon Hara and spreading it in the newspaper so that every single person who read the Chicago Sun-Times would know about this, one thing that she could have done was she could have told law enforcement, and law enforcement, they would have said, well, we now need to investigate this situation because we're not sure if Unitrack is actually guilty. So they would have set out like an investigation, and it would, you know what, it would have also been completely confidential, so no one would have known. And therefore, according to Rabbi Joel Hammer, no, it wouldn't have been considered Lashon Hara because she was only telling one person, and it was completely kept secret.
Thank you. One other question. The pasuk in Vayikra says, "Lifnei iver lo titein mikshol," don't put a stumbling block for the blind. But Maya had approached the company beforehand and wanted to seek information in a very straightforward way, and she was denied that. How would you take that into account, that this company was not iver, was not blind to the information she was trying to uncover?
Yeah, so I believe that probably in this case, this was an interesting like point that we were talking about earlier, is that Unitrack was probably like not responding to like Maya's emails when Maya was asking them like, hey, tell us some information about this, probably because they wanted to cover up a scandal. And that's probably what a company would probably do in this like situation. But like I think that they probably I'm not exactly sure like if it would be considered like a stumbling block if they didn't like respond. I think it probably would, because like they're repeatedly like denying Maya's like information, and basically so like then Maya is like, well, what am I going to do now? Like there's this really bad company and I have to investigate, so she created a fake account to try to get in. So I think probably like, they probably were like creating a stumbling block by not responding to Maya and not allowing her to investigate, like not using all this like fake stuff. She could have like just investigating like how most people like do it.
Okay, so turning to the constitutional side of this, I'm interested in understanding what happens if we agree with you. So if we agree with you and she's liable under this act, is there money? Does the story have to get pulled down? I mean, what follows from this? Because that gives me great concern.
I think that the story should be taken down and Maya should have to pay some amount of money, maybe not like the full extent of the damages, because like that might be like too much money for like an individual, but there's like some money to like, I guess, help you and try to get back on the feet after this, even though it's more art.
I'd like to follow up on Justice Hoskins' question here. The Food Lion case, which you were relying on here, if I understand Food Lion, said that the reporters in that case who went undercover and lied about their identity in order to get a job with Food Lion, that they were guilty of trespass. They had unlawfully come onto Food Lion's property, right? And so they could be sued for the tort of trespassing to land. But the court in Food Lion said that Food Lion could sue them and get damages for having come onto their land. They couldn't sue them. They couldn't sue ABC for the news story that ABC published in Dateline, unless they could meet the New York Times standard that we were talking about sort of earlier on, right? Showing that the story was either knowingly or recklessly false, and because the story wasn't false, then Food Lion was not allowed to recover money from ABC for the damage to their reputation. And so I wonder whether we should hold the same way here. So if we were to decide that Maya should not have lied in order to get access to the service, under Food Lion, shouldn't we still say that Food Lion is not Unitrack is not able to get damage because of their reputation unless the story is actually false, and if it's not false, then there shouldn't be any damages.
Yeah, I guess that makes sense, but I still think that at least the news story should be taken down. Yeah, I don't know, yeah. So, like, even if Unitrack won't get their money back, at least future people trying to like apply to Unitrack won't hear about it, I guess.
Yeah, so let's talk about that a little bit, to pursue that issue a little bit. I would have thought that a big purpose of the First Amendment protecting freedom of speech is to allow people to find out if there are abuses, if they're fraudulent or wrongful conduct that's being brought about by corporations, and if it actually is true that, as your colleague said, that this was a total scam, and that they were really trying to exploit these students. Why shouldn't we say that the very point of freedom of speech and freedom of press is to allow the whole community to actually know about that? So instead of taking down the story, maybe we should leave the story up so people can be on their guard against this kind of fraudulent scheme.
I would agree with you if how Maya got the information was lawful, but she broke CFAA to get the information, and as an Food Lion, which is ABC, that reporters should be able to gather media without like breaking laws, and that new law won't have more than an incidental effect on media gathering.
I just have one more question, sort of picking up on the point that you just made. It seems clear that what Maya did here definitely violated the terms of agreement, which was a sort of contract between the company and everybody who sort of signs up with them. And the contract says, I'm going to tell you the truth, give you accurate information and so forth. And so when you violate a contract, then you can be sued for breaking the contract. Here we're talking about whether you can also be sued for breaking this federal law passed by Congress, the CFAA. And I want to ask you whether you think that she actually did break that law or not, because what we're told in the case is that that the law makes it unlawful to get unauthorized access to a computer. And clearly she got unauthorized access to their service, but I was wondering whether you think she actually got unlawful access to their computers somehow, because I don't quite see how this works exactly.
So I think that by taking data from them, like taking data from their from like their servers and stuff, like screenshots and like notes and stuff. So also about like how she broke the CFAA, she by breaking the terms of service, she no longer had authorization to use that service, Unitrack service. And so she kind of, the minute she signed up, she didn't really have authorization to even use the service, much less take information from it.
If it pleases the court, my name is Ayala Fati. Today we're asking you to find rabbinically Hernandez guilty of lying to be able to vote in. Rabbi Ukva says you shouldn't hurt anyone and with words or hurt their reputation. We have argued that Rabbi Ukva said anyone who speaks malicious / hostile speech is appropriate to stone him with stones. This means you shouldn't speak badly about anyone, and if you do, you should be punished. Maya was speaking badly about you and Jack, and by that she should be punished. In Leviticus 19:16, it states, "You shall not profit by the blood of your cow." Maya is trying to get more publicity to the news station, so they get more success and by that more money, and she's profiting of Unitrack's back, which is unlawful. And Baba Metzia 410 it says, just as there is provision against exploitation, buying and selling, so is there on the iron statements, i.e. verbal mistreatment. What she's doing is verbal mistreatment because she's speaking negatively about Unitrack. Ona'a is when you do fraud in words. Thank you for your time.
If it pleases the court, my name is Miguel Hamairi. Today we are asking you to find that constitutionally, Maya is not protected by her First Amendment rights. We have argued that the First Amendment has limits and that it is illegal if reporters got information via crimes. The First Amendment never states that you could do anything or say anything you want at any time, especially on those accounts. In the Food Line v. ABC case, reporters were trespassing even though they were employees. Why are they considered to be trespassing? Well, they were undercover for a news station and lied about themselves. Just like Maya, she's also undercover for a news station and she's also lying about herself and her identity. So the government therefore should punish her. In the Van Buren case, the case isn't worried about Van Buren being allowed to use the computer, but it's worried about what he used it for. The CFAA is a law about gathering information and not how you use it. Maya directly went against the CFAA by using her device to get into Unitrack, lying and breaching the terms of agreement, which stated that if you make an account, it has to be truthful and accurate, which Maya intentionally went against. But you could say that the company made a mistake and that if you take, and they can just catch her, right? But if you take that much time to make an account and to hire actors and take and maintain it for months, then it's risky because if they also catch the wrong person or wrongly accuse someone, then they'll get a bad reputation, which is one of the last things you want when you're running a brand company. So in closing, once again, we ask you to find that the government should punish Maya Hernandez because she was not protected by her First Amendment rights. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Unitrack team. And we are on our last case for the day, which is We Play versus Playtime. Thank you all for being such an attentive and patient audience. We have one student on this team who unfortunately is home today, but is, I believe, online and ready to present. So I'm gonna make sure, yeah. Noam, can you please turn your video on?
Yeah. Oh, wait.
I'm gonna hold the mic next to the computer so we can hear you. Okay, so Noam is gonna begin. Can we, you would also need a slide deck presented right now for Noam?
No, we're fine.
Okay. Wait, should I start?
No, we're not quite ready. Just gonna make sure everyone. Okay, everyone can see Noam. I'm gonna hold it.
Let's see.
Okay, no, I'm gonna do a test talk. Say something in just a minute. Go speak now.
Okay. Hi. Can you hear me?
Go ahead, Noam.
Okay. If it pleases the court, my name is Noam Turek, and with me today are my co-counsels Ari Lowenthal, Elizabeth Benson, Matea Lasky, and Lily DeVere. We are here to argue on the legality of WePlay's advertising. There are two different perspectives, the US Constitution and the rabbinical law. From the constitutional angle, we believe that WePlay's advertising is protected by the First Amendment. However, from the rabbinic angle, we believe that WePlay's advertising is misleading and wrong and should not be allowed. WePlay is a company that makes
a little bit louder for us, buddy.
Okay. WePlay is a company that makes playground equipment. Their main selling point is that their business is women-owned. And customers bought from the company because they wanted to support women-owned businesses. However, when they applied for a grant of small businesses that were women-owned, the grant organization found that they were only 2% women-owned and the rest was split between 3 men. WePlay was denied the grant, and then Playtime, WePlay's biggest competitor, sued WePlay under the law that says you can sue companies if they're false advertising, and they won. WePlay appealed, saying that 2% is factually true and that they should be protected by the First Amendment.
I am presenting the rabbinical side. So the question is, at what point does the advertising become misleading? And the other question is, at what point does advertising take advantage of the buyer? We think rabbinically, we plays advertising is exploiting people because they are taking advantage of the buyers by saying that they are woman owned. When they are only 2% woman owned and 98% men owned. And a source that I found that applies to this case is Leviticus 19:14. It says, "You shall not insult a deaf person, or you shall not put a stumbling block in front of a blind person." And in this case, we play saying that they're woman owned is the stumbling block. And customers that want to buy from this business to support woman owned businesses is like the customers. But then when the blind man falls over, it's them realizing that, oh, they were only 2% woman owned and 90% men owned. And then I have another source, which is Bava Metzia 60a. I think Bava Metzia 60a is the most applicable because it is telling us different types of cases and what is misleading or not. And like it also says, you may not over exaggerate. So a seller cannot put good beans on top of a barrel of bad beans because it will deceive customers. And like the top 2% is good beans and the rest is bad beans. So like spoiled rotten beans. So like the top 2% is like, oh, I want to support women-owned businesses because, and like, oh, because like I want to support them. And then that's the good beans. But then like the 98% is like the bad beans when they realize, oh, it's men-owned and 90% men-owned, and I want to support fully women-owned businesses. And then I have a source that doesn't apply, which is the Shulchan Aruch Yoreh 95. It connects to what we play is saying because it says anything that is like 1/60th or more acts as if it is 100%. Fish that were well cooked in a roasted in a well washed meat pot with no fat stuck to it, it is permissible to eat. And with kutach, which is a milk-based food. But the fish is like two degrees removed, which is like, and you can't taste it, it's fine. But if like you didn't wash it well, and like 1/60th of like the fish is still on the pot, then you spread the cheese spread, kutach on it, it is not kosher. Even if it is like what the rabbis are saying, even if it is 1/60th, it'll act as it is 100%. However, this does not apply to our case because it is different for food and for like advertising. Like for food, it's supposed to stay pure and like help you follow Jewish law. But for like the advertising, it's supposed to not be misleading and it's supposed to like keep society from not being corrupt. Thank you for your time.
Good afternoon. My name is Elizabeth Benson, and I will be presenting the constitutional part of this argument. The constitutional question of this case is, at what point does we play as advertising lose the protection of the First Amendment? We think that constitutionally, we play as advertising is protected by the free speech clause in the First Amendment, which opposes our rabbinical position. One precedent that applies here is the court's decision in 4-4 Liquor Incorporated versus Rhode Island. What happened there is Rhode Island banned advertising for liquor in places where it wasn't sold. And the court found that the ban was unconstitutional because banning speech stopped information from being spread. It's better if there's more speech than in advertising than not at all. The court said, quote, advertising is nonetheless dissemination of information as to who is producing and selling what product, for what reason, and for what price. To this end, the free flow of commercial information is indispensable. This is similar to our case because it involves limiting commercial speech. Let me explain. In the court's decision, it states clearly and explicitly that advertising is an extremely important part of the economy, as stated in the code above, and it should be protected by the First Amendment. According to Justice Stevens, part truth in advertising is better than banning or limiting advertisements as a whole. He says, quote, and that the best means to that end is to open the channels of communication rather than to close them. It is precisely this kind of choice between the dangers of suppressing information and the dangers of its misuse, if it is freely available, that the First Amendment makes for us. Justice Stevens is saying that, yes, information in advertising can be misused, but there is a higher danger in completely stopping it. This brings up another issue that concerns limiting commercial speech as a whole. Limiting commercial speech as a whole would really hurt the economy, which is why Justice Stevens talks about how important it is to keep commercial speech protected by the First Amendment. And because it's not good to limit commercial speech as a whole, it is not justifiable to limit weed place advertising. It's not justifiable to limit weed place advertising. Another precedent that applies here is the concurring opinion in Central Hudson Gas and Electric Company versus PSC. In Central Hudson versus PSC, what happened was there was a fuel shortage, and the Public Service Commission of New York banned advertisements from electric utilities to conserve energy. But after the fuel shortage eased, PSC wanted to keep the ban. And Central Hudson, a gas and electric utility company, said the ban was unconstitutional because there wasn't a clear reason for it anymore. The court found that the ban was unconstitutional in favor of Central Hudson, and the concurring opinion agrees, saying that there is no reason to ban or regulate the outlets. The concurring opinion and the court's decision bring two different reasons, which I will also address. We agree with Justice Stevens' concurring opinion's reasoning and why the ban was unconstitutional. His reasoning in the concurring opinion, he said, quote, there is no justification to regulate something that doesn't involve coercion, deception, or misinformation. If it's truthful communication, just because people are buying from the company does not mean it's right to regulate it. Going by this evidence, Central Hudson's advertisements shouldn't be banned or regulated because they aren't deceptive, neither are they dangerous. We can say the same thing for replay ads. Well, and even though Playtime did argue that replay ads were deceptive because the business was actually only 2% limited. However, we believe that their advertisements aren't deceptive, they're true, because they said they're women of business and they are. Also, it isn't right to regulate an advertisement just because people are buying from business. Customers bought from WePlay because of their advertisements, and their advertisements shouldn't be banned or regulated because people wanted to support them as a woman-owned business. Justice Thomas's concurring opinion in 4-4 Liquor talks about the difference between commercial speech and non-commercial speech. However, this does not apply in our case because we know from WePlay itself that this is a case of commercial speech. Another applying source is Molson Coors versus Anheuser-Busch. And in that what happened there is Bud Light, which is owned by Anheuser-Busch, had an advertisement that said that Coors and Miller Lite, which are owned by Molson Coors, are bad because they use corn syrup and we don't. Molson Coors, however, did not like that because it was only true because they use corn syrup in the making of the beer, but there wasn't corn syrup in the final product. Molson Coors sued Anheuser-Busch for false advertising. The court found that Anheuser-Busch's advertisements were constitutional because the advertisements didn't say that Molson Coors beers had corn syrup in them. It was just implied. Advertisement itself, however, was still true. This is similar to our case because it involves part true implications in advertising. Judge Easterbrook said that it's not Anheuser-Busch's fault because Molson Coors said about itself that corn syrup is an ingredient in their beer. It's hard to say that something is false or misleading about a rival if the rival says it about itself. He was saying that because Molson Coors lists corn syrup as one of the ingredients on their bottles, it's not, it can't be misleading. Well, you might think that because Molson Coors listed corn syrup in the ingredients on the beer bottle, but let me just, sorry. But in the Molson Coors versus Anheuser-Busch case, Bud Light ads implied that there was corn syrup in the Coors Light and Bud Light when in fact it wasn't. And in Leaflays versus Playtime case, customers assumed that the business was fully women-owned, when in fact there was only 2% women-owned. However, the actual advertisements were true and they didn't actually give false information. Now, you might think that because Molson Coors listed corn syrup in the ingredients on the beer bottle, which might have been one of your questions, that had they not listed it, the court's decision would have been different. In our opinion, the decision neither would have nor should have been different because they would have been able to find out that particular facts anyway when they were gathering information before they heard the case. They don't need a list of ingredients on a beer bottle to find out if Molson Coors has corn syrup in their final product or not. And their decision would have been the same. A countering source that we have is the reasoning of the court's decision in Central Hudson versus PSC. Again, as we said in the beginning, there was a fuel shortage and PSC banned advertising from electric utilities to conserve energy. And when the fuel shortage eased, PSC kept the ban and Central Hudson didn't like it because they thought there was no reason. The court found that the ban was unconstitutional for different reasons than the concurring opinion. They thought the ban was unconstitutional because Central Hudson passed the 4-part analysis. Well, what is the 4-part analysis? That's a test that the court came up with to see if commercial speech should be protected by the First Amendment. The test went as follows. 1, is it not misleading? 2, is the governmental interest substantial? 3, does the regulation directly advance that governmental interest? And 4, is the regulation more extensive than necessary to serve that interest? With this test, you might say that Leafly does not pass and should be regulated and banned because their ads are misleading and they're fortunate. But what does misleading mean? The definition of misleading, according to Merriam-Webster, is to give a wrong impression. However, it isn't Leafly's fault that people took it as 100% women. Just because people made assumptions about a company does not mean the advertising should be limited. Let me explain this further. Their ads didn't say that it was 100% women. They said that it was woman. It's not Leafly's job to articulate exact data in their advertisements. In Leafly's case, their advertisements were done in hopes of getting customers, which they succeeded in doing. They got those customers truthfully, and those customers supported a woman-owned business. Another reason that their advertisements are not misleading is that the woman, though she may only directly own 2% of the company, she did take her initiative to have her picture on the logo. She does oversee a lot of the marketing and communication around the company. And those advertising that Leafly succeeded in getting those customers, those customers, they weren't only supporting direct ownership, they were also supporting the woman's impact and effort of that company. And it's not just the direct ownership that has to do in saying they're woman. That in and of itself should prove that Leafly's advertising is not misleading. In addition, if the people wanted to know how much of the business is woman-owned, they could look it up themselves. These days, it is common for small businesses to have websites that list the owners and workers of their business. As you can see, Leafly does pass the question in the 4-part analysis of, is it not misleading? Moving on to the second and third question of the analysis, is the governmental interest substantial, and does the regulation directly advance that governmental interest? These questions do not apply in this case because the government is not involved. To the fourth question, is the regulation more expensive than necessary to serve that interest? In this case, it would mean, is it more expensive than necessary to ban Leafly's advertising? We think that it is more expensive than necessary to ban their advertising because Playtime could just counter Leafly with an ad of their own to call Leafly out for so-called false advertising. Like, don't buy from Leafly, they say they're woman-owned business, but it's only 2% woman-owned, or something like that, as long as it was true. And then it would be up to the customers to decide if they want to buy from Leafly. Thank you for listening to the constitutional perspective of our arguments. I now pass it on to my co-counsels, Lily and Matea, for the Q&A. Thank you very much. Hi, I'm Matea Ross. We are going to be answering the rabbinic questions. Your audience,
Thank you for a wonderful presentation. I wanted to commend the name of the student who Noah, who gave his, it was a very creative application of a source that was not provided in the packet. So I'm gonna apologize in advance for asking about that source when I get to it. All right. So your argument is that according to rabbinic sources, they should be liable for misleading, but according to constitutional sources, they should not be liable for misleading customers into believing that WePlay is a women's owned business. Now, I'm a little, I want to ask about that distinction because you think that they should be liable in halacha for misleading, where you made a strong argument for the fact that constitutionally they were telling the truth and the customers were the ones who took the mistaken impression and applied it all the way to think that it was 100% woman owned. So I'm curious if you could speak to that distinction.
So I think in the rabbinic section, like a part truth, there's no truth at all because it's misleading people. And in the constitutional section, a part truth would count as a full truth.
Okay, I mean, I was curious because what was cited in the Sikra of the Midrash on Kedushim of Lifnei Verily Tzim Shol, again, what you had been saying was that there in the constitutional section that there actually is truth here. So just raising that as a question, and that according to Bava Metzia, Bava Metzia 60a, which was cited as well, the rabbis permit giving incentive to buy a product. Even if it's not representative of everything else. So I'm curious about, right, that was this type source that was cited. And then to the 160th source, which was, the argument was that once there's a 160th present in the mixture, that changes the identity of the entire mixture. In the rabbinic sources, or as much as I understand them, 160th represents a felt sense of the presence of the item in the mixture, right? They're discrete items and they're mixed together. There's 1/60th of an item, of an element in a mixture, then it's considered like felt presence, but it doesn't define the entire mixture. And so I actually think that the 1/60th argument could actually mean that there's 2% might be a felt presence of a woman-owned business, and that and therefore that if there's 1/60th, and in this case, I guess 1/50th of the company is woman-owned, that might actually strengthen the argument that they were telling the truth according to the halacha, that there's a felt that it's felt that it's a woman's own business, and that folks who are investing or buying can feel that in their, I guess, when they interact with the company or with their values. So how might you respond to that?
Well, I believe that Noam's point was that the 160th point was only to food, and it should not be related to advertising.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. I also very much appreciated the in-depth preparation of these sources, including bringing in sources from other realms of halakha. I wanted to ask a question about who is responsible halakhically, whether it is Sarah Anderson who is responsible halakhically, or whether it is her co-owners who are in fact the majority owners of the business. That this describes Sarah Anderson as having taken the initiative. And she's the one who is speaking in the advertisements, but she is not the one who is getting the vast majority of the benefit from the advertisement. That 98% of the benefit is going to her three co-owners. So I'm wondering who you think really fully bears this responsibility. Is it her for being the one who's speaking, or is it her co-owners who are the owners of the business and who are getting the benefit from what's happening here?
It's like I think like the information if who really proposed the idea to have Sarah Anderson be kind of the face of this company. I think that they all pose, I mean, at least some sort of responsibility because they all do benefit at least a little bit, even though the men benefit more.
Hi, thank you for an excellent presentation. I am very interested in figuring how far you're willing to go for the view that if it's true even a little, the First Amendment protects it. So let's imagine that we'll go back to one of what my colleague referred to as hypotheticals, which is one of the things we do in the law all the time. So let's imagine a different kind of company, a company that sells eggs. And as you may know, animal welfare is very important to a lot of people who buy products. And so imagine a company that sells eggs and says, we raise free-range chickens. And it's true. They raise free-range chickens. They become very popular. They become so popular that they have to buy lots of other chickens that they have to keep in pens. But they keep a handful of chickens free-range. So it's always true. And all the rest of their chickens are kept in tight pens and produce eggs the same way other companies produce eggs. Are you okay with that? You think that's protected speech?
I think that if they continue to fix the claim that they were raising free-range chickens and some of them were, then I believe that it's still protected by the First Amendment.
So let's talk a little bit about the sort of the underlying purpose of protecting commercial speech. For a very long time, the Supreme Court said that commercial advertising was not protected at all by the First Amendment because it didn't have anything to do with promoting democratic self-government or sort of individual self-expression or anything like that. But in 1976, I think, the Supreme Court sort of changed its view and it said that that commercial advertising should be protected because not because of any right on the part of the speaker, but because it was good for the public in general to have information about the goods and services that were being offered. And your colleague sort of brought that out in her presentation. So I guess my question here is, whether you think it really is good, is better for the public to have this advertising that is I would say extremely misleading, right? I mean, that is to claim that it's a woman-owned business when in fact there's only 2% sort of, women-owned. Is it in fact better for the public to have that speech sort of out there and for the government not to be able to restrict that? Or would the public be better served by having sort of much more accurate, and sort of clear information? Just the last point in connection with this is, if this business is women-owned, then there's practically no business that isn't, right? So any publicly traded business certainly would have at least one woman stockholder in the United States, right? And that from this point of view would also be women-owned. So doesn't that really just make the language meaningless and sort of useless from the standpoint of consumers, that they really aren't in a position then to tell the difference between a business that truly is woman-owned and a business that isn't?
I believe they should understand if it is women-owned and if something is partially true, they can say it, but if it is 100% false, then they should not be allowed to make that claim because people won't know what they are buying.
I'm not. It just turned off.
Your computer did?
All right. It pleases the court. My name is Ari Lowenthal. Today, we are asking to define that from the constitutional perspective that WePlay's advertising is constitutionally protected by the First Amendment. And on the other hand, from the rabbinical perspective, we are looking for you to find that WePlay's advertising is exploiting the buyer and unacceptable. We have argued that rabbinically, WePlay's advertising is exploiting the buyer because in Leviticus 19:14, it says, "You shall not insult the deaf or place a stumbling block in front of the blind." In our case, the customers are the blind, and WePlay is placing a stumbling block in front of the customers by saying that they are woman-owned. The customers are then stumbling over the block by buying it when only 2% of WePlay is woman-owned. In addition, in Bava Metzia 60a, it says, "And the rabbis concede that one may not sift the meal only from the beans that are close to the opening of the bin to create the impression that the contents of the entire bin were sifted." In our case, WePlay's advertising is like putting the sifted beans in front of their business because their advertising is in front of their business. When you're going online, you go to their website, it says, "WePlay, we're woman-owned." And maybe even the first time you see them is when, like in a magazine ad where it says, "We're woman-owned," which is just like putting it in the entrance of the store. Also, you may say that in Shulchan Aruch, it says, if a pot was not well washed, there is no more than a 60th of the fish worth of substance on the pot. It is forbidden to eat them, a fish with the kuta. 2% of the company is more than 60th, so it is forbidden to lie about being a woman-owned business. So it's acceptable to say that they're a woman-owned business. However, this does not apply because advertising is different than food. For food, it's supposed to stay pure, and advertising is just supposed to not be misleading. Therefore, that does not apply to this case. We have argued that WePlay's advertisements are constitutionally protected because in 44 Liquor Marketing versus Rhode Island, Justice Stevens said the free flow of commercial information is indispensable, saying that the flow of commercial information is necessary for a good economy, even if it's partially true. WePlay, in this case, is partially telling the truth. Also, you may say that in Central Hudson versus PSC, WePlay fails the four-part analysis because their advertising is misleading. But misleading is giving the wrong impression, according to Merriam-Webster. And WePlay is not hiding that only 2% of their business is woman-owned. You can just search it up. Also, a woman, just because it's woman-owned doesn't mean that the woman is not contributing to the company. And public companies, they may not be contributing because they just own like stock. But in this private company, which WePlay is, the woman is in control of a lot of parts of this company. In closing, we once again ask you to find that from the constitutional perspective that WePlay's advertising is constitutional and protected by the First Amendment, and from the rabbinical side, that WePlay's advertising is exploiting the buyer. Thank you.
Let's give a round of applause to all of our students. I'd like to give the panelists a few minutes to confer. If you guys are, the kids are very excited to hear, whether they convinced you or not, but they are prepared for either answer, so it's okay. You don't have to be nice to them. If you ever take a few minutes and even just step outside in the hall and talk a little bit, if you want to stretch their legs, you can, but we are going to be wrapping up soon. Thank you all. Went longer than we planned, but that's because they were so prepared.
While our panelists are conferring, I just want to be sure that we take a moment to thank our teacher leaders here who helped guide our students through this process every step of the way. Ms. Chipman, Rabbi Novak, and Rabbi Bauman. Without their guidance, we would not see the brilliance that we saw today. So thank you very much.
Great job. All right, I think our panelists are ready.
A bit of advertising.
And I remind the students that the decision is not a reflection of how hard you worked or how impressed the panelists are with what you presented today. But they are doing their job of thinking constitutionally and logically and giving you a response on that, and you all will handle yourselves accordingly, yes? Excellent. You're going to continue to appear as professional as you have all afternoon. Okay, so we're going to turn it over to our panelists to give their decisions in the 4 cases.
All right, so we decided from a halachic perspective that the first 2 cases, definitely there was lashon hara that happened. And that the people involved should do tshuva and repent. We were less sure about imposing monetary fines because of the Eino Lokeh, because of statements about not imposing punishments, but that the people involved should do tshuva, should repent, and learn Torah. Especially since they're both in education, and since it seems like both of these things came from disputes about grades or cheating, that they should learn Torah in a way that's not about grades or about getting into things. Unitrack, we decided that there was a breach of contract involved, and that there should be some penalty. I think we were less convinced by the lashon hara. What is that? So I think that there would be a small penalty for Hernandez, but not to require her to get down.
Correct, right, for protecting the public interest.
Yeah.
We thought there was a lot.
Yeah. And then for WePlay, we agreed with the arguments, and that WePlay should stop advertising the way that they're advertising.
Okay, so for constitutional side, for Jackson, we decided that if Jackson loses, MP loses, Jackson prevails. That's clear defamation. So congratulations there. Epstein and Hamilton. This was sort of an interesting hard case. I mean, we all feel like we both felt like this is pretty clearly defamation. The problem is that this is special Illinois statute that very, 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 very likely is unconstitutional and overbroad, especially because of its impact on political campaigns or potential impact on political campaigns. Unitrack is sort of a win for Unitrack, but it's what we call a Pyrrhic victory because we think that Hernandez is not going to really suffer any as a result of this. We can't think of any damages that flow that would be recoverable to Unitrack, given that the only thing that was disclosed was true. And despite, I don't remember who it was, but despite the best efforts to get us to take down the story, we are not taking down a truthful story about fraud against students. And then finally, in the WePlay, we again, very vigorous argument that any bit of truth is enough to protect them with the Constitution. That's just not our view. Thank you for that argument. But we're gonna say that something that's not quite this close to the line falls well and comfortably within the meaning of misleading, and therefore is not protected.
Okay. Thank you. All right, I'm looking at the time. I would like to release any people who need to go, but if our panelists have a few minutes and students have questions about what they do, about their own experiences in this realm, this would be a good time to ask if people have time. If we need to leave, then please head out. Okay, students, do we have any questions for these four experts that we have here about what it is about the First Amendment, about the work that the rabbis do, about any of the things that came up in this case, or any of the sources that you encountered, about what it is to teach law, what it is to appear before the Supreme Court, anything? Joshua.
What was the randomest case that you've had in court?
The randomness? I hesitate to share this. I sometimes do pro bono work for criminal defendants. And actually, one of the very first cases I ever had was for a young man named George Peterson, who had made some bad decisions in his life. And he had joined up with a gang. And he and his friends in the gang had learned about some guy who had some money, had some cash, because he was selling drugs out of his home, marijuana out of his home, also selling unlawful guns. So they went to rob him. And when they went to rob him, they were met by the man's niece, who had a shotgun. And when she fired, the blowback from the shotgun went through the ceiling. They ran away. He tripped. He fell. His gun fired and went through the wall of the next door neighbor and killed a visitor to the next door neighbor's house. So yes, that's the strangest thing. So this is the part that's a little bit odd. For reasons that have to do with very poor technology in the Indiana State Police Department, the case ended up being prosecuted by the federal criminal prosecutors. I got involved at the appeal stage, and George Peterson today is out and free because he should not have been prosecuted by the federal government. That's a mistake on their part. And George Peterson has lived a productive life, married, had kids, grew up, and who he raised. He's now he opened a Midas shop and owned a muffler shop. And, he made a bad mistake, and he got exceedingly lucky.
Thank you. Jonathan?
One of you two said that you work at Loyola, right? Yeah. So like, isn't that it's Loyola's like a Christian school, right? So what's it like teaching Judaism in like a Christian school?
Thank you. It's very interesting work. I teach classes to my classes. I have 35 to 40 students in a class, and usually most of them are Christian and more than half of them are Catholic. They take my class because they at Loyola, students need to take classes in theology. That's a requirement, and my class counts. So why do Catholic students need to learn about Judaism? Because Jesus was Jewish, because the Hebrew Bible is part of the Christian Bible, and because Catholics are starting to understand that. They're starting to understand that learning about Judaism is part of what they need to know in order to understand what it is to be Catholic. The students that I teach don't know very much about Judaism, but they're interested to learn. It's a lot of the time what I'm teaching them is important to them and connected to their own religion, even though they're not Jewish.
What's the most straightforward case any of you guys have, like, as in like the easiest one to solve, like as in one you would solve it, or something like that?
It's a hard question, actually. Most of the time, easy cases, they aren't necessarily brought to, they're not brought to court, because easy cases are usually easy to resolve outside. And so usually when people come together and actually need a judge to decide who wins or loses, it's because there's some reasonable argument on each side. There are some cases that are, a little bit outside of that, but I think it's a little bit tough to say.
Okay, I think we have time for one more question, which goes to Venice.
What's it like defending someone who you believe is guilty, or teaching someone how to defend someone who you think is guilty?
Great question, Ernest. Thank you. I have defended people who, as you already know, have killed them. I have represented them, and I've represented people who killed other people at the U.S. Supreme Court. And I do this with a heavy heart, but because I think that prison is a terrible, terrible thing to do to another human. We also have, in some parts of this country, the death penalty, which is a very, very serious thing for the government to do to another person and to their family. And that every person has that spark of human dignity. And that as a society, if we don't hold on to that and respect that to the very last, then we can't sleep it comfortably. That the horrible things that we sometimes have to do to people because of horrible things that they've done are right and just and fair. And giving them an opportunity for adequate representation is inescapable if we want to be able to live comfortably as free people. That's my view.
So I'm going to talk about this from the standpoint of a legal scholar as opposed to a practicing lawyer, not like Rob. So the First Amendment protects freedom of speech, and that often means protecting speech that you really dislike, that you think is extremely sort of wrong and hurtful, and yet the protection for freedom of speech means that even views that you strongly disagree with need to be given legal protection, partly because of what Rob was just saying, which is that there's this inherent human dignity, and that means that everybody has the right to think for themselves and to express their views, even though you might strongly disagree with it. And also because free speech is essential for a democratic society, for us to be able to deliberate with one another about issues of justice and the common good. So rather than having the government step in and decide what views are allowed to be expressed, it's important for everybody to be able to voice their views and to have all of us as citizens decide what we think is true or not. And that I think is something that you would hear sort of people very commonly say. I want to add though that in my own view, the First Amendment should not be understood to be an absolute, and was never meant to be in the way in which it was written. That in fact, if you were to go back and look at how the founders thought about freedom of speech, they would have said that free speech is an inherent sort of natural right of individuals, but it's limited by the rights of other people. The classic example that they would have given was defamation. So I have a right to free speech, but you have a right to your reputation. If I tell malicious lies about you, then I've actually wronged you. And the state not only may, but ought to give you a remedy. So that really ties in very much with all the cases that we've been talking about today. And I think a lot of the most interesting cases that come before the Supreme Court these days, having to do with freedom of speech, can often be understood in those terms of sort of rights on either side. So in my own view, the most thoughtful way to approach those kinds of cases is to clearly recognize not only the right to free speech, but also the rights that other people have to personal safety, to privacy, to dignity, to equal citizenship, and so forth. And then to try to figure out what is the best way to balance those competing values in the particular case.
Thank you. And I'm going to ask our rabbis to also address this question of how do we balance our care for each other with guilt when someone does something wrong? Why do we still take care of those people? Or why do we still look up?
Sure. Well, I never have the opportunity to find murderers, but look, questions of guilt and innocence do come up, and I guess one question that people ask me very often is, how can I feel comfortable working with the Catholic Church, given the history of Catholic? So I'm just going to put that out there. That you don't have to be in the legal profession to think about guilt and innocence, and how to live with places where you know that there's guilt. So one way that I would think about the question is, okay, so if you find yourself knowing that someone's guilty, so how would you know? So if they tell you, but if they tell you, they haven't said anything, because there's no lack of principle that a person can't be convicted based on that. So, or it could be because you know by your own perception, but again, your own perception may be biased. It may be coming from you, if that's your own lens. When we read in Gemara Sanhedrin of death penalty cases, what we usually read is the process that the judges went through of trying to find ways to get people out of the penalty, trying to make sure that the penalty doesn't apply. Now, obviously, there are times when it's important to make sure that penalties do apply, but you have to know if you're in one of those places. If you're in one of those places, you know that you are, right? If you happen to be a person whose job it is to impose justice, you know you are. But if you're not, then you're not. And many of us are not. Many of us have different roles in this world. And our roles might be instead to advocate for the kind of world that we want to live in. And the rabbis, when they model advocating for the kind of world that we want to live in, often what they model is looking for ways to see the world from other people's perspectives, looking for ways to see what the world can look like when we see the extenuating factors, the reason someone's actions make sense when you look at it from the place of who they are.
Rabbi Schoenfeld, I was thinking about the similar text from the Gemara in Sanhedrin and thinking about the Beit Din's process of punishing people, what the level of proof needs to be in order to prove that someone is guilty. I'm thinking about the point of punishment, right? Often when I teach Sanhedrin, probably when you learn Sanhedrin, you'll think about what's the purpose of the punishments that are instituted by our halachic system. And sometimes punishments are just restitution of giving back what is owed. Sometimes punishments are for the person themselves, right? To feel weight lifted from them, perhaps a feeling of repairing their relationship with God if it's not with other people. And sometimes punishments are a form of rehabilitation, or that's an argument that's made when we talk about punishments in Sanhedrin, for example, the accidental killer going to a city of refuge as a punishment and kind of being held in this halachic jail where they have to remain until the death of the high priest. And that could be seen as a form of rehabilitation. So that's interesting to argue at the side for the appropriate punishment if we really have faith in how this system plays out. And that's tempered with what Rabbi Schoenfeld mentioned, that when it comes to death penalties and something as awful as final as taking away someone's life, a court that kills one in every 70 years, the Gemara says, is called a deathly court. Right? The Gemara itself speaks out against it, and that's what Rabbi Schoenfeld was talking about. When you learn Sanhedrin and this process of trying to prove someone guilty of a capital crime, it takes a really high bar, right? You have to prove beyond. I'm not going to use your legal jargon because I don't know it as well. But you have to really reach a level of proof that is sometimes impossible. And it's set up that way, I think, also owing to the Tselem Elokim, the image of God that we're all created in, and that we really don't want to come to that end of someone being executed for their crime. So while we do believe in punishment for many different reasons, or say like a natural result of transgression, then we would put a limit on and defend folks against the more harsh and final punishments. And yeah, I'm really curious to hear more about your view on imprisonment in the prison system, but maybe this is not the time.
I think we can all keep going. Unfortunately, I'm watching the clock and we are out of time. Thank you all so much. Please a round of applause for everyone today. Some of the educators, please go upstairs quickly to get your stuff together. If your parents going with your parents, you can come right back down once you have your stuff to dismiss. I will collect your papers upstairs. Great job. Yeah.
Just whether that's true or not. You're back. Will do.